FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
Stuart Schulzke here in Copenhagen with FORA.tv, and with me now is Sam Coates, who is the Chief Political Correspondent for the Times of London. And Sam, we're happy to get a couple minutes with you right now just to get a sense, better sense, I assume you can help us get a better sense for where the UK delegation is on the issues right now, and specifically, is there a chance of a breakthrough?
The rhetoric from Gordon Brown, from Ed Miliband, who's our climate change secretary, is more negative than I've certainly heard in recent years at summits. They are very gloomy about the prospect of an ambitious deal. It looks like this morning the attempts to get a text that to finalise the sort of text that they've been working on for the last 11 days have all but failed. It looks like all the different major parties to the Copenhagen Agreement have abandoned the attempt to get a kind of comprehensive deal, and so we're now rapidly moving on to Plan B, which will look like a much more watered down version of an agreement based around a few broad principles with few binding commitments and numbers, which will provide more scope for interpretation by the individual countries, unilateral action and voluntary action, rather than the kind of binding agreement that many people hoped you would see after the end of this lengthy process.
So would that be described, that's kind of the fallback at this point, the best case scenario?
It does seem to be that we're trying to get Plan B to work, but even that's not at all secure. There are huge obstacles, even getting all 192 countries to swing behind that. China is a major obstacle because it's refusing to sign up to the kind of independent verification of climate change targets that the rest of the world wants to see. The US has this morning made a broad commitment to support the 100 billion for developing countries to reduce their climate emissions, and yet has not said how much of that money it would give itself. So we are still some way away from a comprehensive agreement, and yet. You have 130 leaders all going to be in the same room tonight, tomorrow. It's the first time that's happened in a generation that you've seen so many world leaders gathered together at one point. So there is a feeling now, today, both of having to abandon the original process, but now some new momentum behind the slightly watered down agreement, and the chance that something might come out of it, rather than just everyone holding up their hands and declaring it a failure.
Drawing back to a little more of a general question here. In the United Kingdom, there seems to be broad agreement across the political spectrum, from, if you look at the leadership of the two parties, David Cameron and Gordon Brown, that this is a monumental problem. There isn't really, as I understand it, much of a debate between the parties about climate change as a pressing global issue. You have, however, been sort of the epicenter with the East Anglia thing that's happened recently, the CRU scandal. Is that something, in terms of British public attitudes, is that something that is playing a little bit larger now? Is there an undercurrent of dissent that's growing, or how would you characterize the popular attitudes right now on that?
The climate emails were damaging for the case, and I think that that's pretty widely recognised, because on the one hand you have a political consensus which can very easily be portrayed as the view of the elite handing down their opinion to the masses, and yet you have loosely worded emails, you have an instinctively sceptical public. I think 42% of the public say, although they believe in global warming, they don't believe it's necessarily man-made. You have a sense that people still need to be convinced that there are man-made factors involved in global warming, only to be told that the debate is closed, the argument has been won, and that global warming is man-made. So there is a bit of a gap between some of the rhetoric of politicians, who all profess to agree, apart from a very small number outside the consensus, and the public that are basically saying, it's not that we don't believe that this is happening, but come on, can you at least have the arguments? Can you try and convince us that this is an issue? Don't just tell us we're right and you might be wrong. Convince us, lead us to that conclusion. And that's why the climate emails were so bad, because it smacked of arrogance and a cover-up, although, you know, in the detail the emails perhaps weren't as bad as they were later portrayed. But there is a danger of a group of people saying, you know, this is a problem, you know, you don't need to worry about the science.
Sure.
That way danger lies.
How Prime Minister Brown has really pretty tightly bound himself to this issue. He seems very committed in taking a leading role in producing an agreement. Since you travel with him, at least in this instance, how would you characterize his political relationship to this issue and his level of sort of personal involvement with it?
Well, Brown's opinion of what he can do at this summit is very much shaped by the role that he played in the London summit back last April, where there was a meeting of the G20 where they worked out the basics of an international finance deal to try and alleviate the world's recession and prevent it from dipping down into a depression. Rightly or wrongly, he thinks that he did a very good job at that meeting in London and the follow-up in Pittsburgh, and has the ability to play a pivotal role, bringing different countries together, helping negotiations follow through and kind of push to a deal that means something. So he thinks he can do something good with it. Gordon Brown, in a sense, has a bit more latitude and luxury with this because he has played a leading role and can do something, but his own political fate isn't bound up with the result, as unlike so much else of domestic politics. So many in Britain would say he's overseas, trotting about the world stage, not engaging in the sorts of everyday issues that British voters want to see and are the bread and butter of kind of the sorts of things that most prime ministers spend their time doing. There's a general election next year. The polls would suggest he could lose, so you could see this as him spending a lot of time abroad in the final months of his premiership. So, but personally, he comes across as relaxed, fairly content. In fact, he's more upbeat than many people have seen him in a while. He likes this kind of event and these kinds of negotiations because he thinks he can make a difference, and it's the sort of thing that I think he got involved in politics to do.
Good. All right, final question. Which place is better for a quality education, Cambridge or Oxford?
That kind of question is liable to cause dramatic difficulties for me later in life. But obviously Cambridge has superior ranking in the league tables, has more of a dedicated ethos, and few of the distractions that means that Oxford students for some reason just don't come off better.
So, setting all that aside, would the characterization of Cambridge as a Fenland Poly offend you?
Not as much as the characterization of... no, we can't go there.
All right. Stuart Schulzke in Copenhagen, once again with Sam Coates, the Chief Political Correspondent for the Times of London.